Hawkman number 2, The Shadow Thief, Earth 1. Saga 1, Gods, Monsters, and Mortals, Part 3. The 19th century. Before Gotham had a Batman, before Metropolis had a Superman, before the modern age of heroes had truly begun, there were still people who stood against the darkness, and one of them watched the world from above. Hawkman. The wind howled across the rooftops of a small European city as a man in ancient-looking armor stood on the edge of a clock tower. His wings stretched behind him. A mace rested against his shoulder. He looked down at the streets below. Quiet tonight. Then he heard it. A scream. Hawkman immediately spread his wings. He jumped. The wings caught the air. He soared between the buildings. Below him, a group of men ran through an alley. One of them carried a large wooden chest. Hawkman descended. The thieves looked up. What is that? Hawkman landed directly in front of them. The ground cracked beneath his boots. The men froze. Hawkman raised his mace. Put the chest down. One thief pulled a pistol. Hawkman moved before he could fire. He smashed the gun from his hand. Another man charged. Hawkman grabbed him by the collar and threw him against a wall. The remaining thieves ran. Hawkman took to the air. He flew over them and dropped directly in their path. They stumbled backward. You're not getting away. One of them looked terrified. We weren't stealing it. Hawkman looked at the chest. Then what were you doing? The thief pointed deeper into the alley. He made us. Hawkman's eyes narrowed. Who? The thief looked into the darkness. The Shadow Thief. Hawkman turned. Nothing. Then a voice came from the darkness. You shouldn't have come looking for me. Hawkman raised his mace. Show yourself. A shadow moved. A man stepped out. He wore dark clothing and carried a strange black weapon. His face was partially concealed. The original Shadow Thief. Hawkman studied him. You've been robbing museums. The Shadow Thief smiled. Among other things, you've stolen artifacts from across Europe. And I'm not finished. Hawkman stepped forward. You are tonight. Shadow Thief fired. Hawkman raised his shield. The projectile struck it. The force knocked Hawkman backward. He looked at the weapon. Interesting. Shadow Thief fired again. Hawkman dodged. The projectile struck the stone wall behind him. The wall immediately began disappearing into darkness. Hawkman stared. So that's what the weapon does. Shadow Thief smiled. Anything touched by the shadow can be removed. Hawkman charged. Shadow Thief fired. Hawkman jumped. The projectile passed beneath him. He landed behind Shadow Thief and swung his mace. Shadow Thief barely ducked. The mace smashed into the wall. Stone exploded. Shadow Thief kicked Hawkman in the back. Hawkman stumbled. Shadow Thief fired again. Hawkman rolled away. The ground disappeared where the blast struck. Hawkman looked at the hole. You're dangerous. I've been told. Shadow Thief attacked. Hawkman blocked. The two fought through the alley. Shadow Thief was fast. Hawkman was stronger. Every time Hawkman tried to grab him, Shadow Thief slipped away. Every time Shadow Thief fired the weapon, Hawkman had to move. The fight continued into the street. People ran screaming. Hawkman took to the air. Shadow Thief looked upward. Come down here. Hawkman smiled. No, he dove. Shadow Thief fired. Hawkman twisted in midair. The blast missed. Hawkman struck Shadow Thief with both feet. The villain crashed through a wooden cart. Hawkman landed. Shadow Thief struggled to stand. Hawkman grabbed him. Where are the artifacts? Shadow Thief laughed. You think this ends with me? Hawkman tightened his grip. It ends with you. Shadow Thief suddenly reached for his weapon. Hawkman knocked it away. The weapon slid across the street. Shadow Thief lunged for it. Hawkman grabbed his leg. The thief fell. Hawkman pulled him backward. Shadow Thief tried to kick him. Hawkman caught his foot. Then he slammed him onto the ground. The villain stopped moving. Hawkman picked up the strange weapon. He examined it. Whatever this is, he looked at Shadow Thief. You're not using it again. The police arrived moments later. The thieves were arrested. The stolen artifacts were recovered. And Shadow Thief was dragged away in chains. One of the officers looked at Hawkman. Who are you? Hawkman looked toward the sky. Someone who doesn't like thieves. He spread his wings. The officer stared. You can't just leave. Hawkman smiled. Watch me. He leapt into the air. The officer watched him disappear into the night. Hawkman flew above the city. The world below looked peaceful, but he knew better. There would always be thieves. There would always be monsters. And there would always be someone willing to stand against them. Hawkman looked toward the horizon. Then he flew into the darkness. DC War History Number 1, Task Force X, Saga 1, God's Monsters and Mortals, Part 3, Europe, 1944. The war had turned the continent into a battlefield. Cities were burning, armies were moving through the countryside, and behind enemy lines, there were missions that couldn't be given to ordinary soldiers. That was where Sergeant Trask came in. Trask stood inside a ruined farmhouse, looking over a map spread across a wooden table. Around him stood the men of Task Force X. They weren't superheroes. They weren't experimental soldiers. They weren't monsters. They were soldiers. Men who had been chosen because they could do things other soldiers couldn't. Trask pointed at the map. German patrol comes through here every 30 minutes. One soldier looked at him. And the Nazis were after? Fortified position here. Trask tapped the map. They've been using it to move weapons and intelligence. Another soldier asked, "How many?" "Enough." Trask folded the map. "We go in tonight." Nobody complained. Nobody asked if it was possible. They simply checked their weapons. Hours later, Task Force X moved through the forest. The night was cold. Every step had to be quiet. Trask raised his hand. Everyone stopped. A German patrol walked across the road ahead. Trask waited. 5 soldiers. Then 6. He lowered his hand. Task Force X moved. So, the first German soldier was taken down before he could react. The second turned. A soldier from Task Force X tackled him. Gunfire erupted. The forest suddenly came alive. Trask fired twice. Another Nazi fell. "Move." Task Force X charged across the road. The German soldiers fired wildly. One of Trask's men ducked behind a tree. "Trask! I see them!" Trask fired toward the machine gun position. The gunner fell. "Keep moving." They reached the Nazi position. A grenade landed near them. Grenade! Everyone scattered. The explosion threw dirt into the air. Trask hit the ground. His ears rang. He looked around. Everyone alive? Still breathing. Then get up. Task Force X stormed the Nazi bunker. The door was reinforced. One soldier placed explosives against it. "Everybody back!" The explosion blew the door inward. Task Force X entered. The fighting became close, brutal. A Nazi soldier swung a rifle at Trask. Trask blocked its swing. The two struggled. The German tried to stab him. Trask caught his wrist. He twisted. The knife fell. Trask punched him. The soldier dropped. Trask grabbed the radio. "Clear the room!" Task Force X moved through the bunker. They found weapons, maps, documents, a radio station, and a large table covered with photographs. Trask picked one up. What the hell? It showed Allied positions. Another showed military officers. Another showed a strange woman. Trask stared at it. "Who's she?" One of his men looked over. "I've heard stories." "What kind?" "Stories about a woman who fights like an army." Trask looked at the photograph. "That's impossible." His soldier shrugged. "So is flying." Suddenly, an explosion rocked the bunker. "Move!" They ran outside. A German armored vehicle was approaching. Trask grabbed a rifle. "Take the driver!" His men opened fire. The vehicle continued forward. Trask waited. Then he threw a grenade. The explosion stopped the vehicle. Task Force X charged. The remaining Nazis surrendered. Trask walked toward their commanding officer. The German officer glared at him. "You think you have won?" Trask looked around. "We just destroyed your base." "You cannot stop Germany." Trask stared at him. "Maybe not." He leaned closer. "But I can stop you." The officer said nothing. Trask turned toward his men. "Secure the prisoners." As the soldiers began gathering the captured Nazis, something caught Trask's attention. A distant sound. He looked toward the sky. A figure was moving through the clouds. A woman. She descended toward the battlefield. Her armor reflected the moonlight. Trask watched. The woman landed several yards away. His men raised their weapons. Trask lowered his hand. "Hold." The woman looked at him. "Sergeant." Trask frowned. "You know me?" "I know what your men have been doing." She looked toward the captured Nazis. "You've done well." Trask studied her. "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "Wonder Woman." One of Trask's men whispered, "She's real." Wonder Woman looked toward the horizon. "The war will end." Trask nodded. "I hope you're right." "I am." She looked at the soldiers. "But until then, men like you will have to keep fighting." Trask looked at his men. Task Force X had lost people. They had seen things they would never forget, but they were still standing. Trask looked back at Wonder Woman. "You fighting with us?" She smiled. "Tonight." She turned toward the battlefield. Then Wonder Woman walked toward the remaining enemy soldiers. Trask watched her. Then he looked at his men. "All right." He picked up his rifle. "We've got a war to finish." Task Force X began moving again. Behind them, the ruined Nazi position burned. Ahead of them was another battlefield, another mission, another night. And somewhere across Europe, the war continued, but so did they. End.